Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Yes, today's morning briefing is going to be one of those, in case you hadn't heard. I had to tackle this one in particular because there are some folks, probably shills and plants, who decided they were going to stick up for Biden and saying, I don't know why it is that you can't support Biden. After all, look what he did in regards to reclassifying certain drugs, trying to take the punishments off of black folks for drugs and such. Now, whenever this subject comes up, we always get the weed head contingent who get in their feelings about it. People who I never hear from at any other time will suddenly carpet bomb me with hate because apparently I found the one thing that actually matters to them and I dared to criticize it. Look, it's not my job to give approval and support to everything that people choose to do because a lot of things that black folks do have been hurting us, and this has been encouraged by the enemy. Pot use is already linked with harming the reproductive functions of both men and women. That should be a 3-alarm fire for any black person. And now it's been shown to raise the risk of heart attack, heart failure, and stroke, especially among older people. So, if you have a whole bunch of black folks who decide to become career potheads, not only are they going to be having trouble when it comes time for them to have children, but a lot of them are going to be dying sicker and living shorter lives. I wonder why it is then you have the white media talking about how great it is that pot would get legalized. The longer you use it, the more profound the health problems become. Not just for you, but for the next generation, assuming you even have one. Perhaps the people who use pot would realize that if they weren't too high to notice. It's kind of hard to label something as being medicinal when it wrecks your health or can wind up killing you. And I know some potheads have invented a number of talking points that might sound good to them but don't make sense to anybody else. Such as, marijuana is just a plant. Yeah, well, so is hemlock. Ask Socrates how harmless that was. And don't tell me that it makes you free. Anything that makes you an addict has put chains on you. Now, white power uses drugs as a means to both narcotize us and to justify a mass incarceration machine based entirely on race. So understand that part of the whole legalization switcheroo is that they will claim that they can stop the draconian punishments that they themselves put in place, and they will tell you that you should vote for them because they stopped the brutalization by law that they were inflicting on you. They target our communities with drugs, then they craft laws meant to specifically target us for using or possessing them, and then they turn around and say you should vote for us because we reversed all this harmful stuff that we were doing, at least some of it. Didn't reverse all of it or even much of it, but we reversed some of it. Now go and vote for us. We may need to establish a new definition for the Hegelian dialectic after this, so neither Biden nor Trump or any of the rest of them are doing us any favors. And yet you have these bootlicking Negroes out here saying Biden changed the criminal classification for certain drugs, so we should vote for him now. Yeah, let's forget all about the fact that he was the one who voted for the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act when he was a senator. That was the law that created the 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and powdered cocaine, which, as we know, of course, is a distinction without a difference, but for Hunter Biden, I imagine is probably important. Biden then doubled down on his voting for the 86 Anti-Drug Abuse Act by writing the 1994 crime bill, which imposed harsh punishments for all kinds of offenses, including drug possession or distribution. So naturally, with at least one of Biden's children being a well-known drug addict, and with the meth epidemic which has affected almost entirely the white community, we don't see Biden or any of the other drug warriors so anxious to pass Rockefeller laws for meth or mandatory sentencing guidelines or anything else. Instead, we see them all saying, well, meth is a public issue. So meth has become the first politically protected narcotic due to who uses it. After 40 years of using drug laws to selectively target the black community, Biden and his sycophants now want us to give him credit because he said he would change some of the harsh punishments that he had put in place. And I'm sure this change of heart on his part had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that a lot of white businessmen want to get into selling marijuana, and a lot of white corporations as well, and a lot of white stores like Walmart are at least having their noses open to the idea of selling it. A lot of white people are going to start using it more often and a lot more openly. So this is about creating a legal framework meant to advantage and enrich those classified as white, while we still see black people getting hemmed up for having marijuana even in places that claim to have legalized it. And if marijuana is going to be legal, then black people should have first dibs on being licensed to sell it. Now that's a conversation about drugs that needs to be had, but it's one that's not being spoken about, not even at the state level. So you have a bunch of black people who, after 35 plus years of white media pushing the idea that black people just love to smoke marijuana, putting all that imagery in front of black people, we have a lot of black folks who are going along with it and not even thinking. This is a bad case of black people who are suffering all sorts of horrible health effects and also all kinds of reproductive issues due to this drug that is being pushed and glamorized and legalized, and we're being told there's nothing wrong with it. Well, if there's nothing wrong with it, then why aren't they promoting the idea that black people ought to be the ones selling it? You see, for the white supremacists, the highest expression, the pinnacle of all their sick aspirations, is to be able to make money off of getting black people to annihilate ourselves, to create a self-perpetuating mechanism. For them, that is the brass ring. These white supremacists obsess over that. They will burn out those 2 or 3 last remaining brain cells they've got in their empty heads, trying to devise some satanic way to get us to carry out our own destruction, but also to get us to fund it too. When you can make destroying your enemy into a business, it will fuel itself, and you'll even have members of the group that you're destroying tripping over each other to see if there's any money that they can get out of it. This is what Dr. John Henrik Clarke called the evil genius of Europe. They have been practicing getting their enemies in Europe to subsidize their own destruction for hundreds of years before they brought that same scheme to Africa and the Americas. Okay, so is Professor Black Truth saying that we are to have absolutely nothing to do with selling legalized marijuana? I'm not an advocate for that, but I am an advocate for black people making money so long as they're not harming other black people. You ever watch the movie The Godfather? Those mafioso had strict rules against the use or sale of drugs amongst themselves. But where black people were concerned, let them lose their souls. A community can be a lot of things. It can be dysfunctional but still be vibrant and in fact the driving force behind the culture. But the one thing that no community can ever be is high and free. You cannot be stoned out of your gourd and empowered. It don't work that way. There's a reason I keep mentioning the Opium Wars to you, because Britain was the world's first narco state. They tried to get the Chinese hooked on opium in order to soften China up for invasion and colonization. But the Chinese emperor realized what the British were doing, and he took draconian measures to stop his people from using opium. It worked, and Britain failed to colonize China. Please don't think that the same people who put black people in chains are somehow thinking of ways to do us favors. They're not. They're not going to give you freedom. So instead, they're trying to get you narcotized. I know there's a lot of black people who have taken to doing drugs. The white media went out of its way to popularize the image of rappers in particular, smoking pot, and that's because rap music is music for the young. That's why all over the planet, wherever you find young people rebelling, you see them rapping or imitating rappers. So this was pushing the idea that smoking marijuana should be part of the black community. Sure, we've always had a few potheads running around, but the problem was never as bad or widespread or pernicious as it was up until the 90s. White power used their media monopoly to carpet bomb us with that kind of imagery and media to make smoking pot and black synonymous. That wasn't our choice, any more than the saturating of our communities with images of black people doing nothing but sitting around getting high was. We need to learn to recognize when we're being subjected to propaganda. It's one thing to have marijuana use as a fact of life, but what the white media did was to get us to adopt it as a way of life. Now, I'm not so naive as to think that a few of my audience are not into that kind of thing. Why, I'm sure a few of you may well be doing it while listening to me right now. I guess it is what it is, but the one thing it's not is empowering. To fight white supremacy, you have to be razor sharp and focused. You can't do that if you're inebriated. Now, again, this is not an endorsement, but as Dr. John Henrik Clarke said, if there's something you're interested in, you're supposed to own it, or at least a part of it. If you like cars, you're supposed to own a car plant, or a dealership, or at the very least, a repair shop. You like cell phones, you're supposed to be making them, or at the very least, selling them. You see where I'm going with this? The Chinese ideogram for danger is a combination of 2 symbols, crisis and opportunity. The drug abuse epidemic that was foisted off on us is the crisis part. We know all too well about that. Now, I think that those who are inclined ought to devote some time to exploring the opportunity aspect. Or do you think it would be better to let that go up in smoke too? Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Chevalier Foster, Zachary Jenkins, Jesse Good, Yumuka H., and David Duncan. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.